This is WFYI News Now. It's August 15th, and I'm Abriana Herron. On today's show, the results are in on reading competency among Indiana's third graders. Highway work zone speed cameras are now active in Indiana for the first time. And two women who accused Mayor Joe Hogsett's former chief of staff of sexual harassment talk about changes they say are needed in the city's policy and its culture.
But if there's still a culture that enables this behavior, that protects this behavior and perpetuates it, the policy doesn't matter.
Those stories are coming up, but first, IndyGo's second bus rapid transit line, the Purple Line, launches October 13th. WFYI's Drew Daudelin has more.
The Purple Line will stretch over 15 miles, connecting Lawrence to downtown Indianapolis. It adds new stops and buses, but will also share several stops with the Red Line, the city's first BRT line. The route will begin at the Julia M. Carson Transit Center downtown and will end at the Lawrence Ivy Tech Community College on 59th Street. And the project comes with improvements like traffic signals, sidewalks, curb ramps, and other surrounding infrastructure. IndyGo is set to expand its BRT program next with the Blue Line, which will run east to west from Cumberland to the Indianapolis International Airport. That project has run into a number of obstacles, including funding issues and pushback from lawmakers during the last legislative session. For now, Blue Line construction is expected to begin in 2025 and to be completed by the end of 2027. I'm Drew Daudelin.
Reading competency among Indiana's third graders slightly improved from last year, but the overall performance remains close to the lowest level in the past decade. From WFYI's Education Desk, Rachel Fredette has more.
The state's third graders passed the iRead literacy test at a rate of 82.5%, much lower than 10 years ago, but state leaders are pleased. That's because results are a slight uptick from the pandemic, and some schools getting new state support for teaching literacy posted big gains. Katie Jenner is the Indiana Secretary of Education.
We have to keep our foot on the gas. And those of you who jumped big this year, let's jump again next year. Show your sustainability and continue moving.
Indiana invested heavily into classroom training as a way to combat the literacy decline. Teachers are now required to get licensed in evidence-based reading instruction. I'm Rachel Fredette.
To see your school's iRead score, you can use the database on our website at WFYI.org. Highway work zone speed cameras are now active in Indiana for the first time. As Indiana Public Broadcasting's Brandon Smith reports, the Indiana Department of Transportation began its limited pilot program Wednesday, with cameras in just a single construction zone.
Lawmakers authorized the speed camera pilot in 2023. The law currently limits the cameras to just 4 highway construction zones statewide. INDOT is starting with cameras in a work zone on Interstate 70 just east of Indianapolis. The agency plans to announce additional sites later this year. The cameras take a photo of the rear of any vehicle that is traveling at least 11 miles per hour over the speed limit when workers are present. Whoever owns the vehicle then receives a warning or citation in the mail. The first infraction is a warning. The next is a $75 ticket with $150 tickets for every violation after that. INDOT is using what it calls a pre-enforcement period for the first speed camera. Drivers caught speeding will only receive warnings for at least the first 30 days the cameras are active. For Indiana Public Broadcasting, I'm Brandon Smith at the State House.
And for our final story today, stories of misconduct by Mayor Joe Hogsett's former chief of staff, Thomas Cook, have been published in recent weeks. Roberts and Caroline Ellert say Cook not only sexually harassed and groomed women, but was allowed to continue the behavior for years. WFYI's Jill Sheridan sat down with the two women to talk about a recent letter they sent to the mayor, detailing changes they say are needed in policy and culture.
Can you talk a little bit about the decision to, step forward and put your story on record?
Yeah, well, when the India Star article came out, I was able to kind of get a sense of how people were going to react, and a lot of former colleagues, friends reached out to me and knew it was me anyway, and I think it's important to show other victims that they don't have to be ashamed And also Lauren doing it so bravely as well was a good example. And I felt really strong us doing it together.
And since you both put out a letter, in that letter you say, part of your goal is to, disrupt the culture of victim blaming. Lauren, what does that mean to you?
As someone who has been on the receiving end of that culture, I know how painful it is. And I believe I said this to the Star too, but it was almost more traumatic than the original abuse, was not being believed and spending 7 years wondering if anything would ever happen, not necessarily because I desired to punish anybody, although I believe in accountability, but because I was struggling with the idea that this was still happening to other people, and as I suspected it was. I also think it's important to shift culture in addition to policy, because policy and procedure on paper is one thing. It matters. I don't want to take away from that. But if there's still a culture that enables this behavior, that protects this behavior and perpetuates it, the policy doesn't matter. Because as we've seen with the city releasing its updated policies and making these statements, things were still really bad, and we believe still are really bad.
How pervasive is this? What does this tell us, about the administration, how it operates, and, how many people knew this behavior was happening?
I would suspect quite a few people. I personally, in addition to emailing the mayor, texted, called, Facebook messaged, forwarded emails to several other people around him who I knew from my time on the campaign, people I didn't necessarily have strong personal relationships with. I can count on one hand the number of replies I got, but on 2 fingers, the number of people who sat down and listened to me and believed me from the beginning.
Caroline, would you like to add?
Yeah, I remember whenever Lauren was sounding the alarm, because I was at the city and I was just beginning to experience this with Thomas. And she wasn't believed, and people thought she was irrational. They thought she was crazy. It really made me believe that narrative as well. I think it's also something women in any workplace are used to. There's a certain amount that you have to put up with. And if you don't put up with it, you aren't a team player, or you're just not going to succeed.
The reporting system obviously failed across many levels. What would have helped you?
Well, for me, as a campaign employee, any reporting system would have been helpful. I also think that interventions from people with more experience and who were maybe older and had more influence than I did as a 26-year-old working in Indiana politics for the first time. I had worked on Capitol Hill in D.C., but I was very green to Indianapolis. So I wish that other people had intervened on my behalf when they noticed things like him saying disrespectful stuff to me in meetings in front of other people. Obviously, they weren't able to see the extent of the abuse that happened privately and in text and calls, but they could have said something in those other moments.
In your letter, you have outlined some policy recommendations that, you think would be helpful in the administration, moving forward for women in this type of situation. What's at the top in your mind, Lauren, of something, an action that could be taken now?
I think that investigation is top of mind for me. Before policy can come forward, there needs to be an understanding of the extent of the problem. And also, I personally would like to see documentation of the supposed investigation the city says it did into my report in 2017. I was never interviewed. To this day, I haven't seen any evidence of that.
How about yourself, Caroline?
It's important that victims know their rights. So the education piece of it is really important to me. And I didn't recognize what was happening to me as harassment. I didn't recognize it as abuse when it was happening. So I think it's really important that people know their rights, and they know that people know they feel uncomfortable. They know something's wrong, but it's hard to put it into words. And I hope that by having these conversations, we can help people put it into words.
Well, I thank you both so much for coming in today and sharing your story.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jill.
That was WFYI's Jill Sheridan talking to Lauren Roberts and Caroline Ellert, who have accused a former Hogsett aide of sexual harassment. Mayor Hogsett publicly apologized to the women this week and said he supports policy ideas outlined in their letter. That's all for today's episode of WFYI News Now. Our podcast is produced by Drew Daudelin, with support from the news team at WFYI and public media journalists across the state. Our news director is Sarah Neal-Estes. Kendall Antron produced our music, and I'm your host, Abriana Herron. If you like today's episode, remember to subscribe and share, and follow WFYI on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube to check in on our newsroom throughout the day.